All right, so let's dive into this whole e-reader and audiobook thing. Imagine you're like at a crossroads. On one side, you've got your trusty paperbacks, but then there's this whole digital world calling to you. So maybe you're a die-hard paperback person, but kind of curious about the e-reader thing. Or maybe you're already using ebooks, but just feeling a little overwhelmed by all the choices out there. And that's where this deep dive comes in. We've got firsthand accounts, industry analysis, even some author perspectives in the mix. So by the end of this, you'll be able to navigate the e-reader world, understand the pros and cons, and get this, even see how your choices as a reader can actually impact authors themselves.
It really is fascinating. When you think about it, so much of this boils down to control over how we read, where we get our books from, and even, how much power authors have in this digital age.
Exactly. So to kick things off, we've got this YouTuber, Daniel V. Kindle. Yep, that's his real name. And he used to be a total e-reader skeptic. Swore them off years ago because of bad experience with those early tablet hybrid, the ones that were just drowning in ads.
Yeah, those early devices. They really missed the mark, didn't they? Intrusive ads, clunky interfaces, not exactly the immersive reading experience.
Right. But Daniel recently tried out the Kindle Paperwhite. And get this, he actually converted the faster reading speed, the dark mode, and of course that legendary e-reader battery life. All of that won him over.
Yeah, it's not really surprising. I mean, e-readers have come a long way in terms of technology. They're much more specialized for reading now. Not like those jack-of-all-trades tablets from before.
True. He did have some pretty funny complaints about the Kindle operating system, said it felt kind of clunky, especially compared to how smooth smartphones are.
Yeah, Daniel's complaints are funny, but they also raise an interesting question. Should e-readers be trying to function exactly like smartphones? Or maybe their strength is actually in being purpose-built for reading, offering that distraction-free environment that a smartphone just can't replicate.
That's a good point. But speaking of distractions, we've got to address the elephant in the room here. Amazon?
Oh yeah, we can't talk about e-readers and audiobooks without talking about Amazon. Their influence is massive, and not all of it's positive either.
No, definitely not. In fact, several of our sources expressed some serious concerns about Amazon's practices, especially when it comes to pushing for author exclusivity on platforms like Audible and Kindle Unlimited. They also brought up Amazon's royalty rate, which are often below industry standard, and that directly impacts author earnings, of course. And it doesn't stop there. There are also concerns about how much control Amazon has over ebook, even after you've purchased them.
Yeah, that raises some serious questions about the future of digital ownership. Is Amazon becoming more of a gatekeeper to literature rather than just a retailer?
It's a valid concern, for sure, especially when you consider the case of Brandon Sanderson, the best-selling fantasy author. Well, he flat out refused to put his secret projects on Audible, specifically because of their low royalty rate.
Oh, yeah, Sanderson's decision was huge. It was a real turning point. Here's this one author taking a stand and forcing a massive platform like Audible to actually react. It shows that individual actions can have a real impact, even against giants like Amazon.
Absolutely. It sparked this whole industry-wide debate about author compensation and platform power. It's about finding the right balance. Amazon is undeniably convenient, but is that convenience coming at the cost of fairness to the authors, the creators who make these books possible?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance to strike.
So let's zoom in on this exclusivity dilemma for a minute. Remember Daniel, our e-reader convert? Well, he shared how his own publisher pushed him toward Audible exclusivity for his audiobook, even though he had reservations about it. And it turns out he's not the only one. Other authors, even established ones, shared similar experiences, talking about the pressure they face. So why is this happening? Why are authors being pushed towards exclusivity?
Well, it all boils down to Audible's market dominance. For a lot of authors, an exclusive deal with Audible means wider reach and potentially higher earnings, at least in the short term. But it's a tough choice. Is it worth sacrificing control over your work and potentially limiting your audience on other platforms?
Right, and this is something for you to think about too as a listener. Have you noticed this trend in your own reading habits? Are you more likely to choose a book just because it's conveniently available on a platform you already subscribe to, even if it means supporting a system that might not be fair to all authors?
It's easy to get caught up in the convenience factor, but it's important to step back and really understand the implications of our choices.
Exactly. And it's not all doom and gloom either. Remember how Sanderson refused to work with Audible? Well, his stance actually led to some improvements in their royalty rate. It's a small step, but a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it shows that change is possible, even if it's gradual. But there's definitely more work. We need to address these underlying issues of market dominance and creator control.
I agree. And the good news is there are alternatives out there. We've got Libro.fm, Speechify, Libby, and of course, those good old-fashioned libraries and bookstores aren't going anywhere.
Yeah, it's encouraging to see these alternatives gaining traction. People are starting to realize there are other options.
Right. So have you tried any of these alternatives yourself? We'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we got to talk about Goodreads. You know, that platform every bookworm loves to hate.
Oh, yes, Goodreads. It's a platform built on a love of books, but it often seems like there's this disconnect between their intentions and how the platform actually works.
It's kind of a saga. Really.
Yeah.
And Daniel's experience illustrates this perfectly. So picture this. He's on the toilet, casually tweeting out a random idea for his book's sequel. And somehow, that tweet ends up as the official synopsis for his book on Goodreads.
Oh, wow. It's a hilarious anecdote. But it also highlights a bigger issue with Goodreads. There's a real lack of author control, which means misinformation and inaccuracies can easily spread.
It's like Goodreads is stuck in the early days of the internet, relying heavily on volunteer librarians and lacking the basic features you'd expect from a platform of its size.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Does Amazon even see Goodreads as a platform that needs to serve both readers and authors? Or is it just a marketing tool for them?
That's a great question. And it all comes back to this theme of informed choice. Even when a platform has good intentions, like a love of books, it can still fall short when it comes to user experience and basic functionality.
It's true. Convenience shouldn't come at the cost of functionality and user control. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Does Amazon see Goodreads as a platform that needs to serve both readers and authors? Or is it just a marketing tool for them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's not just about one author's funny anecdote on Twitter, right? I mean, this is a bigger issue.
Oh, absolutely. This goes way beyond just Daniel's experience. We've seen tons of complaints from authors, especially self-published ones. They really struggle to control their book listings on Goodreads, like trying to update information, making sure their book isn't attributed to some other author.
That's got to be so frustrating. You pour your heart and soul into writing a book, and then it's misrepresented on the biggest platform for readers. That could really hurt an author's career.
For sure. It's a perfect example of how disconnected these platforms can be from the creators they rely on.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, Goodreads relies so heavily on volunteer librarians to maintain that massive database.
Which sounds great in theory, right? Like a community-driven effort to organize all the books in the world. But these volunteers are often working with outdated tools, limited resources.
Can you imagine trying to keep track of millions of books and authors with clunky software and no direct line of communication to Goodreads itself?
It sounds like a nightmare.
It really does. And you'd think that Amazon, with all their resources, could invest in some basic features to make everyone's lives easier. Like simple thing, author verification, better communication channels, better moderation tools.
Exactly. Those aren't revolutionary concepts. We see them on smaller, independent platforms all the time.
It's mind-boggling that Goodreads is lagging behind in such basic ways. It really does make you wonder if Amazon is putting their own interests above the needs of readers and authors.
It definitely raises that question. Maybe they see Goodreads primarily as a marketing tool and not so much as a platform that needs to truly serve everyone in the reading ecosystem.
And that brings us back to those alternatives, right? Like we were talking about Libro.fm earlier. They have a really cool model for audiobooks. They focus on author fairness. They support independent bookstores.
Yeah, it's a win-win-win for everyone involved. And they're not alone either. Speechify is another one that's really shaking things up. They're all about accessibility, and they offer crazy generous royalty rates for authors who go direct. They even offered Brandon Sanderson a 100% royalty deal.
It's true. But he ended up declining because he wants a model that benefits all authors, not just the superstars like himself.
Yeah.
Which says a lot about him, I think.
Oh, absolutely. He's a real advocate for the entire writing community. And while we're talking about advocating for change, we can't forget about libraries. They've always been champions of accessibility and diverse reading choices. And now with digital lending platforms like Libby, they're really adapting to this new landscape.
If you haven't checked out your local library lately, you are missing out. They offer so much more than just books these days. They're community hubs with resources and programs for people of all ages. And in a world that's increasingly dominated by these corporate giants, libraries offer a crucial counterpoint: free access to knowledge and stories.
Beautifully said. It's a good reminder that even as technology changes, the core values of literacy and community are still so important.
Exactly. So let's take a minute to recap what we've learned so far. E-readers are getting more advanced, but there's definitely room for improvement on the tech side. Amazon's influence is undeniable, but we need to be aware of how their practices are affecting authors and the whole reading landscape.
And thankfully, there are alternatives emerging. It's all about being an informed reader, making conscious choices about where we get our books and how we support the authors who write them.
Well said, well said. But before we dive into the solutions and how we can actually create change, there's one more elephant in the room we got to address: the booming audiobook market.
Oh yeah, audiobooks are more popular than ever these days. But this industry has its own unique set of challenges.
Remember how frustrated Daniel was when he realized he had to repurchase the audiobook version of a book he already owned on Kindle?
That's a classic example of one of the biggest pain points for readers. This lack of seamless integration between ebook and audiobook platforms.
And guess who's at the center of that disconnect? Amazon, of course. Remember that statistic we came across? 75% of pre-orders for Brandon Sanderson's latest audiobook were through Audible.
Wow, 75%. That's a crazy number. It really shows you how much power Audible has in the market. It's almost impossible for authors to ignore a platform with that kind of reach.
Even Daniel, who's been pretty critical of Amazon, admitted that he ended up going with Audible exclusivity for his latest book. Just because of the financial pressure.
It's a tough situation for authors. They want to support alternatives, but the market forces often push them in a different direction.
It's a catch-22. And this doesn't just affect authors either. Readers are impacted too. We found this article that detailed how Amazon's practices are affecting reader experience and choices.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just price, right? This is about control over the ebooks you actually purchase. Remember when Amazon quietly removed the ability to back up your Kindle library?
Oh yeah, that was a huge red flag. I mean, it basically means you don't really own those ebooks. Amazon does. They can revoke your access, censor content, even change the text without your consent.
Yeah, it raises some serious questions about digital ownership and the power these platforms have over our access to information. It's almost Orwellian.
Makes those physical books on your shelf seem a lot more appealing, doesn't it? At least you know you own them.
You've got a point.
Yeah.
There's definitely something to be said for holding a physical book in your hand, knowing it's yours to keep.
But at the same time, we can't deny the benefits of the digital revolution, right? Ebooks and audiobooks have made reading more accessible, more convenient, more affordable.
Absolutely. We just need to find that balance. Embrace the advantages of technology while still protecting the rights of creators and consumers.
Exactly. That's what we're all striving for.
And that's what we'll be focusing on in the final part of our deep dive. How do we actually achieve that balance? How do we shape a reading future that benefits everyone?
So we're back for the final part of our deep dive. And we've covered a lot of ground, right? The e-reader experience, Amazon's influence, the Goodreads saga. But the big question is, where do we go from here? How do we navigate this whole e-reader and audiobook world in a way that benefits everyone?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, like we're up against this giant Amazon, but we're not powerless. Remember when Sanderson pulled his secret projects from Audible? That actually sparked some real change.
Right. Even if it was just a small step, it proves that we don't have to just accept things as they are. Collective action matters, even from us as individual readers.
Exactly. It's about being conscious of the choices we make, putting our money where our values are, supporting those alternatives.
So let's talk about those alternatives again, like Libro.fm. They're doing great things for audio, fair to authors, supporting independent bookstores, and Speechify, focused on accessibility and generous royalty. And of course, we can't forget about libraries.
Libraries are amazing. Free access to knowledge and stories in a world where everything seems to be behind a paywall. And they're evolving too, with platforms like Libby.
Seriously, if you haven't been to your local library in a while, you got to check it out. It's not just dusty bookshelves anymore. They've got resources and programs for everyone. And in this world dominated by big corporations, libraries are like this breath of fresh air,
They really are. It's a good reminder that some things are timeless, like literacy and community.
And those independent bookstores too, those havens for book lovers.
Yeah, it's a whole different experience. It's about fostering that love of reading and supporting local businesses.
So what does this all mean for you as a listener? It means you have choices. You can stick with Amazon if you want, but be aware of the potential impact. Or you can explore those alternatives, support creators directly, help build a better reading landscape.
It's about taking control of your own reading journey, not just passively going with the flow.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder. What if we all work together, authors and readers? Could we create a future where convenience doesn't come at the cost of fairness? A future where everyone benefits?
I think that's a future worth fighting for.
It starts with each of us. Share your thoughts, try out those alternatives. Let's build that future together, one book at a time. Our deep dive might be over, but your reading journey continues. Happy reading, everyone. We're diving into something a little different today, the world of ebooks. You might think it's all instant downloads and super convenient, but there's actually a lot going on behind the scenes, especially when it comes to Amazon and how they're impacting both authors and readers. So to really get into this, we're going to be looking at author Daniel's YouTube channel. He's been doing some really interesting deep dives himself. uncovering some, maybe some concerning trends, you might say.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is this video we're looking at is actually a correction video. Turns out even he, someone who's, pretty plugged into the publishing world, made some assumptions about how things work over at Amazon.
It really shows you how tricky these systems can be.
Yeah.
You think you've got it all figured out, and then bam, something new pops up. So initially, Daniel thought that to get the highest royalty rate for ebooks, which is 70%, authors had to be exclusive to Amazon. But he actually found out that might not be entirely true anymore.
Right. That whole idea about needing to be exclusive to Amazon for the best royalties has been a big debate in the ebook world for a long time. And that 70% figure is kind of seen as the gold standard because it means authors get a bigger chunk of the profit, especially since ebooks cost less to produce than traditional books.
So if it's not about being exclusive, what's the catch? What did Daniel discover?
It's not quite that simple. It turns out Amazon has these specific requirements that can make it harder for authors to actually get that 7, even if they are.
Okay, now that sounds a little sneaky. What are these requirements then? What do authors have to do?
One of the big things is what Daniel calls the pricing squeeze. Basically, to get that 70% royalty, authors have to price their ebooks within a very specific range. It has to be between $2.99 and $9.99. Anything outside of that and their royalty takes a big hit.
So like if an author wants to, say, run a promotion, drop the price of an older book to 99 cents to get new readers into a series, they'd actually lose out on a big chunk of their earning.
Exactly. Their royalty would drop from 70% all the way down to 35%. So they might get more readers with that lower price, but they're not making as much money from each sale. It puts authors in a really tough spot.
Yeah, stuck between trying to make their books affordable and, well, actually earning a living.
Exactly. And it's not just the pricing that impacts those earnings. There are also all these hidden costs that authors have to deal with, even if they are pricing their books within that, sweet spot.
Hidden cost. What are we talking about here?
Things like file delivery fees. These can be like 15 cents per megabyte. It might not sound like much, but it can add up quickly, especially for authors who have books with lots of images.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like cookbooks, travel guides, photography books, those would all have pretty big file sizes.
Exactly. So authors who create that kind of visually rich content, they're kind of being penalized, even if they're meeting all the other requirements.
So even if you're doing everything right, pricing your book perfectly, hitting all those check marks, you might still not see that full 70% royalty.
That's right. And then it gets even more complicated when you start looking at different markets. Turns out that 70% royalty doesn't necessarily apply to all the major markets, even if an author is meeting all of Amazon's other requirements.
Hold on. So an author could be doing everything right and still not get 70% in some places.
Yeah, we're talking about 4 key markets: Japan, Brazil, Mexico, and India. To get the full 70% in those markets, authors have to enroll in this program called Kindle Select.
Okay, so what is Kindle Select and why does it matter so much in those specific markets?
Basically, it's Amazon's exclusive program for ebook. Authors who sign up agree to only make their ebook available on Amazon, and in return, they get certain benefits, including those higher royalties in those markets we mentioned.
But wouldn't that limit an author's reach, like if they're not on other platforms?
It definitely could, and that's where the dilemma comes in. Authors are trying to balance making a living with reaching as many readers as possible. So being in Kindle Select might mean higher royalties in some places, but it could also mean missing out on readers who are using other platforms.
It's a tough choice, especially for authors who are trying to build a global audience.
Yeah, it is. And this is where you see Amazon's influence. They control such a huge part of the ebook market, something like 80%. So they can really set the term and create incentives for authors to, play by their rules.
So we got this pricing squeeze, hidden costs, and market exclusions. Right. All adding up to a situation where it's harder than it seems for authors to actually get that 70% royalty.
Yeah.
Even if they do choose to be exclusive with Amazon. But there's another piece to this puzzle, right? What about Kindle Unlimited? How does that fit into all this?
Yeah. Kindle Unlimited. That's Amazon's subscription service where readers can access tons of ebooks for a monthly fee. It's become super popular. And that's where things get even more interesting in terms of how authors are navigating all.
I mean, with Kindle Unlimited being so popular, it kind of puts a lot of pressure on authors to be a part of it, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Amazon already has like 80% of the ebook market, and then a big chunk of those readers are mainly using Kindle Unlimited. So of course authors want to be in that pool where all those readers are. It's where they have the best chance of being discovered.
But doesn't that create this weird cycle where authors become even more reliant on Amazon. Like they're drawn to where the readers are, but that just makes Amazon even stronger.
Exactly. That's a key point Daniel makes in his video. He argues that Amazon is kind of intentionally making individual ebook purchases seem less appealing. They're pushing that subscription model instead. I mean, who wouldn't want access to thousands of books for a flat fee, right?
Yeah.
So they're basically shifting readers away from the idea of actually owning books.
So instead of building your own library, you're kind of just renting access to a giant collection. It's like the difference between, say, having a music streaming subscription versus buying individual albums. You get access to way more, but you don't actually own anything.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. And it brings up some interesting questions about the future of book ownership. Like, what does it even mean to value a book anymore if everything moves to subscription? Will we lose that connection we have with the physical books we own?
Yeah, there's something about building a personal library,
Yeah.
creating a collection that reflects your own tastes and interests. Kind of like a record of your own intellectual journey.
Totally. And there's that sense of permanence with physical books.
There's something you can hold,
Share with others.
passed down through generations.
With a digital subscription, you're totally dependent on the platform. What if the service shuts down one day, or they decide to remove certain books?
It would be like having the rug pulled out from under you. Suddenly you can't access something you thought you could enjoy whenever you wanted.
It really highlights the need to be aware of these systems, to not just accept them blindly. We need to think about the potential downs, especially with this digital subscription-based approach to reading.
So given all that, what are some alternatives? I mean, is there anywhere else to go besides Amazon? I know Daniel mentioned a couple in his video.
He did. He specifically recommended checking out Kobo and Libro.fm.
Okay, I've heard of Kobo, but Libro.fm is new to me. What's that one all about?
Libro.fm focuses specifically on audiobooks. So if you like listening to books while you're, commuting or exercising, it's a great option.
Oh, cool. I'm always looking for new ways to fit in more reading.
And both Kobo and Libro.fm have different business models than Amazon. They might not have the same massive library, but they offer a different approach to the whole ebook and audiobook thing.
And of course, we can't forget about good old-fashioned libraries.
Absolutely. Libraries are so important. They offer free access to books for everyone. It's amazing.
Real cornerstones of communities. They encourage reading and learning. And then there are local bookstores.
Oh, yeah.
They offer that curated selection. And it's great to support local businesses.
Totally. It's about finding what works for you as a reader and supporting the platforms and businesses that you feel good about.
So we've talked about hidden costs, market exclusions, the rise of subscriptions, and how all that might impact book ownership. It's a lot to think about. But before we wrap up, I wanted to come back to something we mentioned earlier, the idea of being informed consumers.
Yes, that's so important. There's just so much information out there these days. It's easy to just go with the flow.
Especially with something like ebooks, right? It all seems so simple on the surface.
Click, download, read.
But as we've seen, there's a whole lot going on behind the scenes.
It's not always obvious.
So how do we become more discerning consumers? How do we avoid just passively accepting whatever system is put in front of us?
Especially in this digital age. Yeah, it can be overwhelming, for sure. I think, honestly, a good place to start is just being curious. Don't be afraid to, ask questions, dig a little deeper, especially when something feels kind of off. Like we saw with Daniel, even people who are really knowledgeable can still make assumptions.
Yeah, it's like that saying, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. We have to be willing to, question things and look for those hidden complexities. So besides being curious, what else can we do?
I think diversity is key. If you're only getting your information from one source, whether that's a news site, a social media platform, or even a big company like Amazon, you're only getting one side of the story. You gotta make an effort to see different perspectives, find alternative viewpoints.
So like with ebook, that might mean checking out reviews from different places, comparing prices across different platforms, reading articles or blog posts from authors who are talking about these issues, basically being an active participant instead of just a passive consumer.
Exactly. And even when you see a good deal, it's important to, step back and look at the whole picture. Like with Kindle Unlimited, that low monthly price might seem great, but it's also part of the system where individual book purchases are losing their value and authors might be struggling to make a living.
Right. It's like, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. We have to be willing to think about those long-term consequences.
Absolutely. And speaking of long-term consequences, I want to leave you with something to think about. What happens if this whole subscription thing keeps growing? What will it mean for, the future of book ownership? Will our personal libraries just become, relics of the past, filled with old books that nobody reads anymore?
Whoa, that's a big question. It really makes you think about how much we value physical books and what role they play in our lives. I know for me, there's just something about owning a physical book, building a collection that, reflects my own reading journey. It's like a physical reminder of all the stories and ideas that have stuck with me.
I totally get that. And there's a certain permanence to a physical book that you just don't get with a digital file.
Right. It's something you can hold, share with others, something that'll hopefully outlast all this, constantly changing technology.
It is kind of nostalgic, isn't it? I think there will always be a place for physical books. They offer such a different experience. It's more tactile, more personal, and in some ways more lasting.
Absolutely.
I think the future of reading is about finding a balance between the convenience of digital and the appeal of physical books. It's about getting the best of both worlds and creating a reading culture that works for everyone, readers and authors alike.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's a great way to wrap things up. We've covered a lot today, and I hope this deep dive has given everyone something to think about. The ebook world is always changing, but by being informed, curious, and engaged, we can all help shape its future.
For sure. And remember, this is just the start of the conversation. We hope you keep exploring this topic, share your own thoughts and discoveries, and make choices that support a diverse and, thriving literary world.
That's it for this deep dive, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, happy reading.